Hi again then guys, and welcome to another look back into the past of the ToCa franchise, to ToCa 2 Touring Cars once again, the game which you could argue has some of the best secret cars of any driving game or racing game. It's got a very strong selection. We already of course looked at the first generation TVR Speed 12, which is an incredible unicorn car. Not many games feature that one. And this is, in a funny kind of way, in a very similar boat, because this is a car which we have had on other games, and doubtless will continue to occasionally, but just like with the Speed 12, it's a different version of the car that we don't usually get. Because of course the car in question is the Lister Storm, and that's pretty much all you're told about the car in the game from the title. And for those who aren't familiar perhaps with Lister as a brand or the Storm as a model, it's actually not just one car. There are multiple incarnations of the Lister Storm. There's even a Lister Storm LMP car, which looks incredible. That one isn't featured on very many games either. This one, though, is the even more specialised Lister Storm GTL. And personally, I think that this car looks a little bit like a Panos, like the GTR1 from some angles. And again, it's a further evolution, basically, of the Lister Storm concept. It's sleeker, more compact, more aerodynamically efficient than the normal Lister Storm. Personally, I still prefer the normal one. It's a much more unique looking car, but this one has a lot to offer. Of course, they also race this one, just like they did with the original, and in the game, it's an interesting car to drive and also to compare to some of its rivals, because of course, the Speed 12 isn't technically a direct rival to it in this form, because it's more the Speed 12 prototype or concept. And even the XJ220 that's in the game definitely isn't a rival because, for one thing, it's not a race car. So this one almost has kind of the feel to itself. It's a full-on GT machine, of course, but at the same time, it has a couple of indirect rivals in the game, but nothing to truly take it on. So with that in mind, what's it like to drive? Because when the Lister Storm does show up on games, sometimes it's brilliant, and other times it tends to get overlooked. Even within the Gran Turismo franchise, for instance, back on Gran Turismo 2, the Lister Storm, I would say, is one of the best handling supercars in the game, and it's one of the most powerful cars in the game. Whereas on later Gran Turismo games, when we only had the racing version in the green and yellow, it just doesn't feel as good. It's too heavy, it's not competitive enough compared to how good it should be, in a similar way once again to the Panos GTR1, and this one is in a bit of a different boat. Because, as I said, it doesn't have too many rivals to take it up against, and of course with the secret cars it's more about enjoying them on their own, rather than necessarily racing them in career mode, because of course it's a touring car game. It's not about Speed 12s and Fiestas and XJ220s. So with that all in mind, what's this one like to drive? Especially in comparison to the normal Lister Storm in road or racing form. Well, in some ways I would say it's a little bit better, and in other ways not so much. One of the particular ways in which it's better is manoeuvrability. The GTL version feels faster through corners. The normal Lister Storm is a very large car. It often feels like a very heavy car, until you modify it, of course, and it has a tendency to take up a lot of the road, in a similar way to stuff like the Nissan GTR, which is also a very physically large vehicle, and by definition becomes an even bigger race car once you add wings and body kits and all that kind of good stuff. With this one, it's the opposite, because it's sleeker, it's smaller, the front end is more narrowed and sloped for better aerodynamic efficiency. It has kind of a McLaren F1 GTR look to it, which suits the car. It makes it look a little bit less unique, but it certainly suits the shape nonetheless. The disadvantage, ironically, is actually the brakes, and you can see a few times in this video, on one corner in particular, I pretty much overshoot the curve every time by braking too late. And I didn't always do that deliberately. I carried on doing it to highlight the point, but initially the first couple of times it was just a miscalculation on my part. But that miscalculation is based on the fact that you expect the brakes on a car like this to be a lot better than they actually are, at least in this game. Now, of course, in the real world, I'm sure the brakes were very good. They kind of have to be for the race car to be competitive at all. But in the game, they lack a lot of feel, and they certainly lack a lot of power as well. It doesn't slow you down in time sometimes, and also the car has a tendency, a pretty good tendency, but one which definitely needs to be kept in check, of going a lot faster than you think it is. Which, as I said, that's a great thing to happen with the race car, but again, you need to really monitor your speed, monitor corner entry speeds, and also very much so compensate for the lack of brake power, because you do need to brake a lot earlier than you would expect to. And that's the only downside, really. Now, of course, in a game like ToCa, it doesn't matter too much. It would matter a lot more if it was, say, a GT class racing game, with like the Brit GT series against Monaros and Mosslers and Morgans and various others, most of which, of course, started racing a little bit later. But still, that kind of competition would quite easily outrun this one, actually, because of the brakes. But thankfully, in this game, it's pretty much on its own, as I said earlier. So you can enjoy it for what it is, but you might be a little bit disappointed by the brakes. Apart from that, though, for any Lister Storm fan, I definitely am one, it's nice to see it in the game, for sure. There are far too few games to feature any form of the Lister Storm, be it the LMP car, the race cars, or even the road cars, because there is also a GTL road version, which is super rare. I mean, the normal Storm isn't exactly a mass production vehicle, but they're all special. They're definitely unicorn cars as far as games go, and in the real world as well, and it's nice to have the opportunity to drive one. But that's it for this showcase. Overall, of course, I'll see you guys next time, and for now, as always, thanks for watching.